Paul, I'm really glad to finally meet you and to have an opportunity to have you join our podcast. This is Paul Eastwick, and the book that we're going to be talking about is this one. It's called Bonded by Evolution: The New Science of Love and Connection. And I found it really, really both interesting, engaging, helpful, and really breaking some new ground in this whole field that I've been involved with sex, love, and relationship for a long
Yeah.
time. So I'd like to just read briefly your little bio, at least a piece of it from your book
Great. Love
jacket.
it.
So Paul Eastwick is a professor of psychology at UC Davis, where he serves as the head of social personality psychology program, the social personality psychology program, and the director of attraction and relationship research laboratory. So we'll get into your book a bit,
Yeah.
but I wanted to just start out, as I do with all my guests, by asking a little bit about your own origin story. How
Sure.
did you get interested in this very broad and specific field about evolution, relationship, and all the things we will get into more fully in the book?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I vividly remember the moment that I discovered evolutionary psychology in the first place. I was a teenager at the time. This was in the 1990s. And evolutionary psychology was really breaking through in both the scientific space and in a pop culture conceptualization of the thing too. So it was becoming more well known. I remember encountering this Time magazine article, and the headline was something like "Infidelity, It May Be in Our Genes." And it was this story about how humans have evolved a particular psychology that enabled them to handle issues of attraction and relationships, and where do we pursue relationships, and how do we maintain them over time. And I remember coming away thinking two things like, oh, how fascinating is this that we can use the lens of natural selection to understand how we approach like dating? Like, that seems novel and exciting. And at the same time, this story is awful. It was so bleak. It was really all about how men and women are going to try to trade up on each other and they don't have much in common. It was quite a grim story. And so that twin right there, like, this is exciting and this is disturbingly bleak. But like, is this true? And what might be other ways we might approach this? And that kind of led me down this path ultimately.
Super. Well, we're going to get into more of that and share some of my own journey in
Yeah.
these realms. But I was very interested, so I'd like to just have you say a little bit more about what you do as director of the Attraction and Relationship Research Laboratory. I mean, that sounds exciting.
Yeah.
That sounds interesting.
Yeah.
Sounds mysterious. So say a little
Yeah.
bit more about
Right.
what that actually is and what you do there.
It does sound a little mysterious. The reality is, we're a standard academic research laboratory. What that means is that, I work with a collection of graduate students and undergraduate research assistants who are all conducting studies, trying to better understand the way that attraction works, trying to better understand the way that close relationships work. And of course, we work in collaboration with similar laboratories at other universities around the country and throughout the world. But our main approach as psychologists, right? Like, we're research psychologists. So, we don't see patients, we don't have clients and things like that. We study how people react to situations involving initial attraction. Maybe we'll bring them into the lab and have them interact. Once upon a time, I was responsible, along with Eli Fingal, for running a bunch of speed dating studies. That was something that we did. Sometimes we study ongoing couples and ongoing relationships too. We might conduct surveys to see how people are doing in their relationships on a daily basis. So, we have a lot of different tools for exploring attraction and close relationships. There's no one right or wrong way to do it, but our general guiding principle is that whenever possible, we want to understand the real relationships that people have and the real life attractions that they experience. Like, who might you be into in your real life right now? And yeah, that kind of captures the work that we're doing on a daily basis.
Gotcha. Well, I know, having both done the work that I've done over the years, I'm a psychotherapist. I work day
Yeah.
to day with people and their problems. And I've also written 17 books on different aspects of health and healing. And I know it takes a lot to write a book, and you're obviously
Yeah.
quite busy. You have a lot going. How did you come to decide to write this book? And who is the book for? Who's your
Yeah.
primary audience?
Yeah. So, um, I've been very happy for a long time just playing in the academic space. What we what we academics do is we run studies like the ones I described, and we write them up for academic journals, and not a lot of people read them. It's just usually those of us in the space, and sometimes you do a press release or two around a new study or new finding, and that's all very exciting. But I was very happy playing in that academic space. We have debates, we work things out in the pages of these academic journals. And then a few years ago, I realized that there was this gigantic space on the internet where people, everyday people, were debating and theorizing about and contemplating some of these same ideas about human mating, the same ones that I'd been studying for, I don't know, upwards of 15 years. And these ideas were actually becoming quite toxic. I'm talking about things like incel culture, the manosphere. And in fact, not only were these ideas kind of toxic, they were grounded in a few evolutionary principles that were really pretty outdated by this point and were relevant to much of the research that I'd been doing. So part of me was like, wait a minute, these folks are citing these old studies. They don't know, like, actually, a lot of these things haven't held up all that well in the interim. So that was the moment that I realized that it was important to bring some of this new scientific work on love and attraction to a broader audience. And so for anybody who has heard that 90s evolutionary story about how grim attraction and close relationships can be, I wanted to bring the up-to-date version. Like, we've learned a lot about how these processes work in the last several decades, and I thought it was time to bring that research to people who are generally interested in these topics.
Well, I think everybody to some degree is interested
Yeah,
in these topics. We all are interested in relationships. We've all been in and out of relationships. We've all had to look and start new relationships.
yeah,
I mean, that's part of being human. I think many of us, like me, are in the field of counseling and therapy and work directly with individuals. Others, I've been in the academic world as well.
yeah,
So it's a very personal topic. I found your
yeah,
book,
for
quite
sure.
frankly, speaks to a number of different audiences. It certainly is very sound scientifically. So anybody who's academically inclined, can really see the footnotes and the background
Yeah,
on
right.
this. If you're
There's
a
there's a lot of
clinician like
notes, a
me,
lot of
it's
notes.
yeah, I want to know, is this useful? What's the science that backs it up? And then for the average, person that's out there in the world, it's very readable. So, as you know, if you visit my website, Men Alive, my introductory video is Confessions of a
Yeah,
Twice Divorced Marriage Counselor. And I talk about, my own experiences, having been married twice before, and now having been in a now 46-year marriage with my wife. And so I've been through
yeah,
the the
yeah,
various stages that many people go through. And, I think everybody at some point has been in or has been in the dating scene. And there's a lot of different things that are going on now than were there when
Yeah.
I was dating the first time around and even the second time around. So, talk a little bit about why things seem so hard, in the modern dating world or just in the relationship world, and what's going on that's making things so difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I like to start with the apps, and I'm not a 100% app detractor. I definitely see the value that the dating apps have. And just to be clear, the value is that they allow people to meet face to face who never would have had a chance to meet otherwise. And there are many, many people out there who met their partners through the apps. So there is an important function that these apps serve. But I think in many ways, the apps aren't really designed to make the whole thing a pleasant experience. I mean, the apps are meant to be used, right? I mean, they're designed to get our engagement. The act of swiping, the act of looking through all of these profiles is supposed to be enjoyable in and of itself. That is how these things are designed. And part of what seems addictive about the apps is that, well, it often seems like there's a lot of people out there that you could be dating. I think that has some challenges for our psychology. The simplest one is just that if you feel like there are a great many options out there, you are less likely to commit and settle down with any one particular person. Sometimes in the broader psychological research literature, we call this the choice overload phenomenon, right? If you feel like there's tons of choice, it actually makes it harder to make a choice because you want to kind of make the best choice. And that means the whole process takes a lot longer and is more unpleasant. So, at its core, I think that's part of what's going on. I think there are some other challenges with the way that we socialize these days that are contributing that I think we'll get into a little bit later. But generally speaking, look, the apps are helpful in a lot of ways, but as they've become the main way that people look for and meet partners, I think they've had some exhausting downstream consequences for people who are actually out there dating.
Yeah, I agree, and we will get into that a little bit more. I recently got contacted by a female colleague of mine, and she asked me, "Have you heard about the burn the haystack movement?" And I
Yes.
went, "No, I didn't." And then I found out there is a book that's coming out because I hear about the latest books. It's called "Burn the Haystack: Decode Dating, Torch the Duds, and Make Room for the Men That Matter." And I was just interested in the idea of, I think colloquially we talk about finding that right person is like finding a needle in the haystack. And this concept was, well, one way to find the needle in the haystack is burn down the haystack, and then what's
Yeah.
left will be the needle. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts about that general idea of how you approach finding that special someone.
Yeah. Um, I think this is mostly wrong. Um, and let me start with what might be the positive of this approach, which is that um, I empathize with people's frustrations. And so, if the frustrations have gotten people to the point where they're essentially willing to say, 98% of folks that are out there, like, I'm not giving them the time of day. I'm going to focus my efforts on this, like, narrow slice here. There's a version of that I get. I
Yeah.
understand the desire to whittle down the sheer amount of choice that is out there. And so that version of, you know, burn the haystack,
Yeah.
I can get behind. Um, I don't think that's the only thing embedded in here, and it's the other components that make me
Yeah.
nervous. For example, the idea that you think with a very brief impression or a mistake that somebody makes in texting that people are right out. I just can't disagree with this more strongly. First impressions are unstable. Part of the problem with dating is that we don't give people multiple chances. We think we can tell in a 20-minute coffee date that we're compatible with somebody, that we're really going to click with somebody, that this thing is made to be. If you look at the vast majority of relationships, not just throughout history, but even in the present day, the average, if you look at what these relationships looked like at the beginning, when people were meeting for the first time, the typical first impression is a middling first impression. Most people who go on to be gloriously happy, lifelong partners didn't think much of each other when they first met. So if you are now demanding essentially that somebody knock your socks off right from the start, um, you are asking for something extraordinarily rare. So again, I understand the desire to like whittle down the possibilities to something more manageable. But the idea that people get only one moment to make a good impression or that you cut them right out at the first mistake because you're trying to find this so-called needle would not be my recommendation. And, I'll probably have other things to say in the course of this
Right.
conversation that contradict this approach. But yeah, not for me and not, I think, well backed up by the science.
Yeah, I just anecdotally my own, personal life experience with my present wife. We've been together, I said 46 years. We would have not been the
Yeah.
ones that anybody would have predicted or that we would have thought when we first met because we
Yeah.
didn't immediately think we were in fact, it was not immediate, but developed
Yeah.
over time. So we'll get into that a little bit
Yeah,
more
I mean, if
because
if everybody were to do this, and I don't know, 80% of relationships just never happen.
never
I mean,
happened.
I
Exactly.
just again, for the occasional person here or there, depending on your context, okay, maybe, but like as broad advice, like I just can't
Yeah.
disagree more strongly with
Yeah,
this.
well, we'll get into more with what
Yeah.
the apps and other ways kind of make their living, not on making good matches, but on the ways you stay
Yeah.
engaged, and that
Yeah.
happens so much. So I want to talk a little bit more about what you talked about the origins of evolutionary psychology in your life. I had been in the field for quite some time and had already done my own research in different evolutionary issues when I
Yeah.
read David Buss's rather famous book, The Evolution of Desire, Strategies of Human Mating, which came out in, I think, 1994. And,
Hmm.
what impressed me was it was a worldwide study. He had sampled lots of different cultures and a lot of different people and had some interesting and seemingly, powerful conclusions that, I both got interested in and looked into. And I actually met him and gone to conferences and learned more. But I know for you and for me and for those of us that have broadened our understanding since those original works, that there's a major difference between what you call evolutionary psychology and relational evolutionary psychology,
Yeah.
which I think resonates more with both modern and more recent data and facts, and also what I've learned clinically and many other people who actually work in the field of working with people. So talk a little bit about those differences between those two, evolutionary psychology and relational evolutionary psychology.
Yeah, this is a good question, and I'll sort of talk about three differences, and I want to be clear that these are differences in emphasis between two ways of thinking about the way that the human psychology evolved to approach things like attraction and close relationships. One of the differences is in the realm of gender, right? So are men and women deeply fundamentally different in what they want out of a relationship and what they're looking for? It really depends on the methodology. Some methods show medium-sized to very large gender differences. Others show pretty small gender differences. And it so happens that I come from a tradition where the methods we use, which we think are very appropriate for studying attraction and close relationships, they just tend not to show many gender differences. A second major difference is that this idea of like a strategy, like a short-term strategy or a long-term strategy, and people specialize in one or the other. In the field I come from, we talk about the difference between, short-term flings and long-term relationships, but it's not about like, oh, like some people are good at one and some people are good at the other, and like people are pursuing these things strategically. They're just like different kinds of relationships. That's a second difference. But I'd say the biggest difference of all is the emphasis on the idea that some people are, for lack of a better term, desirable and other people are not. And this seems like such an obvious truism in some domains and in some spaces. And it's certainly clearly true if we're talking about initial impressions. But I think the traditional version of evolutionary psychology has overemphasized this point, this idea like we want some people for relationships and not others. I think it misses that actually relationships are mostly about the relational component, and that many, many, many people can be a supremely desirable partner for some other people. That is, we do not all play in the same space of, well, we all want to date this person, but we can't, so we have to settle. I think that is a common idea about what's going on in attraction and close relationships. And from the data that we collect, that is not how people experience it. And there's a good evolutionary reason why we don't experience it that way.
Yeah, that's certainly what I, have experienced in my own relationship and thousands of clients that I've worked with over the years. And um, what I found, basically, and this is, I think, what your research has found, and want to get into a little bit more in depth is, what really counts is not these traits that are somehow definitive, but our
Yeah,
compatibility, how we really
right.
relate with each other. And you talked about traits that we are at least told we need to focus on
Yeah.
in some avenues with a partner: personality, lifestyle, values, and humor. You said they're poor predictors of compatibility. And what behaviors and experiences should we focus on rather than these, specific traits that seem to be ones easy to measure, easy to
Yeah.
swipe one way or the other for, but may not really be the things that are important in having a good relationship.
Yeah, this is one of the important points of emphasis that I think forms the foundation from my perspective, which is that compatibility is key, right? It's not about finding the most desirable partner. That's even if that were possible, that's not the main thing that makes people happy in their relationships and want to maintain those relationships over time. It's something that I call compatibility, and I use that term to refer to the fit or the connection between two people that can't be explained by who you are or who I am, right? It's about the intersection of those two things. Now, when I say that, I think what jumps to mind for a lot of people is, oh, right, okay, right. Of course, some people fit together better than others. Like, I don't know, maybe I'm this kind of personality and you're that kind of personality, and our personalities just fit together very well. Or, maybe we both share similar values. We're both religious in the same way. When people hear compatibility, that's where their mind goes. They
Right.
start thinking about similarities like that. However, what we've found in the last, and this has all been kind of a surprise, but in the last 10 years or so, it turns out compatibility is real and it matters, and it can't really be explained by matching people on similarities. It also can't really be explained by matching people with what they say they're looking for in a partner. That also doesn't do a great job either. So all these deal breakers that people are bringing when they're swiping on the apps, I don't know. Like at best, you're probably wasting your time. Like it doesn't seem to predict all that much in terms of what we end up liking when we meet people face to face. In terms of what we should focus on instead, this is where things get trippy and a little out there. But what I like to begin with is instead of worrying about whether, giving this advice to people who are pursuing new partners, instead of worrying so much about whether somebody fits your list of must-haves in a partner, just focus instead about how you feel around this person and about how you feel about yourself when you're around this person. That those are probably going to be better indicators than anything of whether or not you have a chance to build compatibility with this person, because that's actually the part that I really want to convey, is that compatibility isn't something that just like exists, at least as far as we can tell. We'll keep doing more studies and maybe we'll discover something in the future, but right now what we can say is that we're pretty sure that compatibility gets constructed as people spend time together, as they have good rather than bad conversations, good rather than bad experiences, and they're able to follow up on those experiences with more good experiences. It's actually kind of a pretty straightforward trial and error process in that way, but that actually kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier. My frustration with like a burn the haystack approach is that, well, if you're not willing to try different things and you're not willing to try to build on the good experiences and compartmentalize the bad, then I don't know what you're doing out there, because that really is how connections are ultimately built between two people.
Yeah. Well, mentioned my wife Carolyn and I have been together for 46 years, and we didn't meet on an app. We actually met in an Aikido dojo in Mill Valley
Oh,
in
nice.
California. Um, I'd been practicing Aikido. She, unbeknownst to me, she was from Oregon, had some experience with Aikido. She was
Huh.
traveling, happened to be seeing a friend, and we met at the dojo, and they introduced us.
Yeah.
And all we knew is we had that in common. I was newly out of a relationship. I had no interest in getting involved in another relationship of any kind. And we just kind of casually met and hey, nice to meet you. But then I went down for a conference that I was going to go to. She ended up deciding to go to that conference as well because a friend had recommended.
Yeah.
And gradually we just got to know each other. We spent time together. If we had been online, we would have never picked each other. I mean, as an
Yeah.
example, I was shorter than she was, and she was taller, and nobody ever
Yeah.
picked me online because, oh, I want a guy shorter than me. She was older than I was, and I was, always looking for a girl nice and shorter, than me,
Yeah.
and younger, and so we never would have met online, even had a second look. And I want to talk about, because you mentioned that you're not opposed to online. There are some benefits of, modern ways in which people can meet, but there's some downside of, what
Yeah.
goes on in the typical online dating process. So could you talk
Yeah.
about some of those downsides and what are some of the things that we miss? You've talked a little bit about that, but
Yeah.
maybe in a little more detail about the modern dating apps.
Yeah. So I think, right. So the choice is an issue. Um, but I think probably where the experience goes awry for a lot of people is that, when you are on the apps and you're meeting folks and you know that you're single, and you can reasonably assume that most of the people you're meeting are probably single and looking as well. There is a tendency to jump right into an evaluative mindset. And all I mean by that is that from the moment you sit down, you're trying to figure out, is this person for me or not? Like, am am I attracted to this person? Is this, and for a lot of people, they might even be thinking like, is this the one? Is this the person that I want to, form a long-term relationship with and see where this goes? And that's just a tough bar to clear. And historically, that hasn't been the way people have done it. We didn't evolve to do that. We didn't evolve to evaluate people in a marketplace where you are picking a partner, whether short term or long term. That's sort of not how our psychology is designed. The way our psychology is designed is to recognize familiar others, to feel comfortable around familiar others, to be willing to disclose vulnerability to familiar others, because the odds were that if this was somebody that you encountered frequently in our ancestral past, it means that they were a member of your group, that it was important that you could trust this person and that they could trust you, and that having a meaningful relationship with this person, romantic or not, meant that they were going to be somebody that you could rely on as, you tried to survive in, the extremely demanding Pleistocene environment. So feeling like you were connected to your group was extremely important. And I want to be clear, when we were evolving on the savannah, 100,000, 500,000, 2 million years ago, we tended to live in these fairly small groups. You didn't get to meet a lot of strangers. Um, what that meant was that the people that were going to be your potential mates were probably people who were kind of in your social orbit already. So you don't have a lot of choice. What you do have is time to get to know these folks. You probably had a relationship that was very unique with each of them in a way. And so the springboard to attraction, the springboard to having a relationship was much more likely to evolve out of this milieu than it was to be like, okay, here's a stranger, and in 20 minutes, like I'm deciding how I'm going to feel about them. Like it's like taking the shopping mentality and imposing it on a particularly important task, an important psychological task that we have to manage, and that shopping mentality is really not supposed to be there. That's not really how we're meant to go about this. We're meant to get to know people gradually, and each relationship is a little bit unique.
Yeah. And obviously the upside of having a small group that you get to know over time, and eventually you find
Yeah.
all kinds of ways in which you can connect, including, finding a mate or a partner and so on. The downside is that if you don't have a lot of access to a group that's in
Yeah.
your age range and so on, you may have a hard time and have to go farther afield, physically and in our
Exactly.
evolutionary environment. Now on the internet, you have a potential to meet more people, and you mentioned in there. I wanted to get into some of uh, the way in which the manosphere has emerged. My work and my field is in gender specific medicine and men's health, and a
Yeah.
lot about the men's work in the world. And I didn't know this until I read your book, that the idea of the term incel,
Yeah.
involuntarily celibate, which is part of the manosphere, red pill culture kind of things that you talk about, actually was started by a young woman
Yeah.
who then, used it in a way to really connect in a community of people to talk about, the issues she was experiencing. And then later, this whole idea had gotten, then co-opted or at least taken in a whole nother direction. Could you talk a little bit about that whole evolution? And because I think it's very
Yeah.
unknown for most people,
Yeah.
and very, I think, helpful if we understand some of what started out with a positive focus that somehow is didn't move in that direction
Yeah.
currently.
Yeah, I mean, it really is a tragic internet fable, and it illustrates for me a lot of why we still don't quite understand what the internet is doing to us. But here's how this story begins. It's the late 1990s, and there's this woman. Her name's Alana, and she essentially starts a website and a community. I mean, you got to imagine what websites were like back in the late 90s. They were pretty simple, but you could have discussion forums and stuff like that. And so she wanted to build this community around a concept that she called being involuntarily celibate. And part of being involuntarily celibate to her meant coming to grips with your own sexuality, like understanding who is it that you're attracted to. And a lot of it was about being comfortable approaching people, finding ways of making friends, making social connections. And her heart was really in the right place because this community was founded around principles of um, self-improvement, but in a reflective kind of way. Why am I having challenges? What else can I do? How else can I put myself out there? How else can I keep pushing myself to build my social confidence? And look, sometimes I have issues with like the cult of self-improvement, but I like this version of the thing. I like the idea of practice and getting better at your social confidence and putting yourself out there. And a key component for her was um, we don't blame the other gender, and we certainly don't take one bad experience and generalize it to like what all women are like and what all men are like. And to maintain a forum like this online required extensive moderation. And I've been involved in forums like this online. Moderation is time consuming and exhausting. And eventually, people can't keep it up anymore. And what happens instead is that the toxicity creeps in and the urge to complain. I mean, this is just the story of social media.
Yeah.
Negativity is catchy. Negativity spreads. And that's what happened. So the term, it used to be called invacel, and then it became incel, that was once reserved for this group that was genuinely trying to better themselves, then just turned into, I mean, a misogynistic nightmare. I don't think that's unfair. It basically became an ideology associated with the feminists are trying to hold men back, trying to restrict their evolved potential. But women's evolved potential gets to run rampant, which supposedly means that they only desire the top 20% of men. There's all sorts of pseudoscience baked into this, but at its core are some of these, I think, overblown evolutionary psychological ideas that made value, how desirable you are is the end all be all, that men and women are really different, etc. And yeah, it was, encountering this space, seeing the horror that it had grown into, the societal problem that it had become, and realizing that they were claiming this scientific foundation. I felt like I had to at least do my part and come in and be like, well, that scientific foundation is actually not nearly as solid as people generally think.
Indeed. And I think there's reasons why all of those connections that we need to make gradually over time and stay away from the quick
Yeah.
fix, which is part of,
Yeah.
if we got to find that right whatever, and we got to get rid of the other bad people.
Yeah.
And that,
Oh, yeah.
time that we live in, I think is, toxic for everybody, but understandable in terms of the hunger that people have for connection, the
Yeah.
desire to be desirable. And hopefully, in the work that I do and that your research, I think, really backs up, is that we can do better in helping young men in particular who feel particularly vulnerable and feel that they're being left
Yeah.
out in the app world, which in some way, they are, and how
Yeah.
we can offer a more both helpful and more positive alternative to some of the ways in which the influencers now are
Yeah.
taking young men in a different direction. So I just like to kind of say a couple more things about my own
Yeah.
experience and ask you, because as I said, if I and my wife were part of that, we would have never met. We
Right.
were able to develop, a relationship slowly, and get to know each other over time. And part of the compatibility that I think helped us at the beginning because we weren't on an app. We had to meet each other slowly over time, get to know each other's families.
Yeah.
And then we had decided, since we had been both married twice before and had didn't want to do it again, we decided that one of the problems is that we change over time and we make these commitments till now, till death do we part, when we're going to live and be in relationship a
Yeah.
long time potentially. So we decided we would get remarried every 15 years, and we
Hmm.
would make new vows based on who we are now. And I'm wondering, what your research kind of shows about how compatibility evolves and how people change over time and how we need to, be able to update each other on who we are, what we need,
Yeah.
and how to continue to have good relationships through time.
Yeah, I think this is such an important point because when you wrap your head around the idea that compatibility is not something that is fixed and exists within two people before they meet for the first time, and you embrace this alternative, then that it's like, okay, well, it's got to like emerge or be grown or be discovered, right? I mean, again, whatever your preferred metaphor is there, you realize that you have a responsibility as somebody in a relationship to both pay attention to what is going on between the two of you. Again, because nothing is set in stone and nothing is fixed and it can all change. And also not just to pay attention to it, but to be willing to work on it, to adapt, to grow, to be willing to like question, like, is this working all that well? Um, One metaphor that we really like as we do research on this topic is something we call the microculture. And this refers to the idea that every dyad, and this is true for romantic relationships, but platonic relationships as well, um, it's like it takes on a little life of its own with its own set of rituals and in jokes and rules and patterns and stories that are really what give each relationship its life. These rituals and patterns can be an enormous source of joy for people. Generally speaking, in studies, when we ask people, like, what are the stories that are important in your relationship, or what are the in jokes that you and your partner have? Well, when those things come up on a daily basis, people feel happier about their relationships on those days. But I'm also compelled to point out at the same time that the patterns and the rituals that we get into in our relationships can, on other occasions, be the main thing that causes problems. I'm curious if this reflects your experience as somebody who works with people and works with their relationships, but this idea uh, that we're both responsible for the dynamics between us. And when things are going badly, it's not usually because you're a bad person or because I'm a bad person. It's because we've developed a way of interacting with each other that isn't good for either of us. We're locked into some old assumptions that we haven't questioned in a long time.
Right.
Or we just kind of stopped noticing how we stopped spending time together in the mornings because this work thing came up and then that shifted our schedules. And now I see you half as much as I used to, but we didn't really correct for that or try to adjust for that. And now we're starting to feel estranged. So all of these, a relationship is like a thousand little pieces
Yeah.
that all kind of fit together, and you hope that things are flowing well and moving well, but sometimes we forget to check in and notice when those old patterns aren't serving us as well as they used to. And the ability to do that is an important part of what it means to maintain a relationship, what it means to maintain compatibility. It's not just latent in the two of you. You can just sit there and not do anything about it.
Yeah, I totally agree. My wife, and I have iterated, changes over time
Yeah.
that have been very, very helpful. And, we're getting towards the end of our time together, and I want to kind of broaden the dialogue to talk a little bit about what your thoughts are as you take the academic and now what you've put in the book that is
Yeah.
out there in the world of what people can take home. I hope we can get you on again. There's
Yeah.
a lot more I wanted to get into. But what take homes might you offer for people that really are, we'll talk about two different, either are looking
Yeah.
for a relationship, what would you say to them? Secondly, for those that are in a relationship but want to be sure that the things that we
Yeah.
know about how to keep compatibility alive and working will work if you're in a relationship. What would you offer as some take homes for those two groups of people?
Yes. Yeah, so for somebody who's dating and frustrated, yeah, I very much get it. I I'm not suggesting you have to ditch the apps, but if you could at a minimum supplement the apps with some of the quote unquote old ways. And the old ways are simply being out in the world in group like settings where, and this is important, where you will have a chance to run into the same people on repeated occasions. Join a dojo, for example, or an improv class, or some sort of any kind of class that's going
Right.
to meet repeatedly, or an intramural sports league where you're going to interact with the same people over and over again. This is extremely important because we do tend to size people up very quickly based on their desirability when we are meeting them for the first time and when we're only meeting them on one occasion. I think this is a big part of the problem out there is that we've forgotten that sometimes we interact in small groups and we get to know people over time. That tends to be an approach that gives more people a chance of finding a partner. You don't have to be in the top 10% or even the top 50% of desirability to find somebody who's also into you if you're using some more of these small group kinds of approaches. For people who are in ongoing close relationships, um, thinking about like how the relationship is going as though you're tending to this important third entity that is not you and is not your partner. You both have needs and preferences too, but the relationship is something that needs to be cultivated in and of itself. And that um, being willing to interrogate some of your patterns and assumptions is very, very important. Being willing to be a little bit flexible and try new things, I think can be very helpful for a lot of people. So those would be, I think, my main pieces of advice for folks, depending on where they are in this whole process.
Yeah, that's both of those are very helpful. The latter reminds me when my wife Carlin and I had been together for, a period of time early on. She made a statement that at first I bristled at. She said, I can't commit to you, but I can commit to us. And
Mm,
at first what I heard was I can't commit to you.
yeah,
And then I realized, well, within the us there is a me. And it really spoke to this bigger entity that's the
yeah,
us and being able to see how are we doing when something's off rather than what's the matter with you or what's the matter with me. What aren't we doing to nourish each other or the us? And now
yeah. That's
46
really good.
years
There's a
later
lot of
we're
wisdom in that.
still
Yeah.
finding out how we do that. So I want to just wrap it up with asking how people can find your book. Obviously we can't reach over your shoulder and
Right.
pull one off of
Take it off the shelf.
yeah, right. I've got my own copy here, which I'll
Yeah.
hold up again. So it's an
Yeah.
actual. And how can they find the book and how can they be in touch with you and your work
Yeah.
and be able to know what else you are doing that might be of interest?
Yeah, so you can get the book wherever books are sold. Any major large websites you may have heard of. Also things like Barnes and Noble and bookshop.org. You can find the book at all of these places. And then if you want to keep tabs on me, check out the Love Factually podcast. That's a podcast that I'm on regularly with my co-host Eli Finkel. We talk about these topics as they are reflected in romantic movies, rom-coms, etc. So yeah, the Love Factually podcast is where you can follow along.
Well, super. Well, I hope we can talk more and maybe
Yeah,
have you on again because there's other
that'd be great.
areas that I think would be useful to kind of bridge the world that you work with and the world that,
Yeah.
I work with. And I think there's some obviously natural compatibilities and things to
Yeah, there you go. That's great. Thanks so much for having me.
Good. Well, until then, we'll say goodbye for now and we will talk again soon again, I'm sure.
All right. Thank you.